Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Osceola's Reeling Them In podcast / videocast. My name is Pat Burnham, and I am joined today by two legends of the recruiting game, National Recruiting Analyst for Rivals, John Garcia, and, of course, the Osceola's own Charles Fishbein. And both guys had a very busy weekend as Rivals had its Miami camps and combines on Saturday and Sunday. Combine on Saturday, then obviously the elite camp on Sunday, guys. And first of all, have y'all recovered? I know it was a long day, a lot of great-looking prospects based on the videos you guys sent me during the course of the day, and we had our live thread at the Osceola going at the same time. John and Nick and Charles were all down at St. Thomas Aquinas High School. But y'all ready to roll? You recovered?
Yeah.
Good to go.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's jump right into it because y'all saw a lot of good players, and we'll kind of start off, which I'm prone to do. Let's start off with the big boys. Let's start off with the offensive linemen. Two targets that are high on Florida State's board. Both of you kind of raved about these two kids. I love the film that you guys sent, and that's offensive tackle Zaire Addison, 6'4", 280 from Sumner High School. And then you got Max Buchanan from Seminole High School, 6'4", 275. Let's start with those guys. And Fish, I'll let you start. I'll let you take Zaire. Then, John, you take Max.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing about Zaire, and I think John will probably tell you the same thing, he's a high hip. He almost has like a track body in the lower body for a offensive lineman. Really high hips, long legs. His torso is a little different. Like he looks like a kid that's running track, and you're talking a 280, 290-pound kid. The potential's there. You can see he moves very well laterally. He's got length. He does a very good job of redirecting. When a guy goes outside and it comes back inside, he has athleticism to recover. He has all the tools to be a special player at the next level, but he's still raw. There's things that he's got to work on. Sometimes he'll lean over, bend, or get off balance, but that stuff's correctable. Technique stuff, as you know, Pat, that stuff you don't really worry about. It's the foot quickness. Can they move laterally? Can they bend? Can he get down in his stance and really do those things? The technical side can always be improved at the college level.
Yeah, I agree. He's a tall kid. Of course, I did not know until John's interview that he plays just about every sport available at his high school. He's actually a track kid. I think you mentioned that, Fish. But listen, I thought his lateral movement was really good. I don't know what you guys thought in person on the film. Zaire's ability to change direction was really good. And of course, listen, you're in pads. You're not in shoulder pads and helmets, and those guys are still throwing their hands, just like the defensive guys are in helmets and shoulder pads. But John, just your additional thoughts on Zaire and what you came away with after Sunday.
Well, he's still long and lean, as Fish said. Yeah, I think he weighed 283 on Sunday. Carries it really well. Looks more muscular in his upper body and plenty of room to fill out in that lower body. But it's really the length that really captures your attention. We measured him over 80 inches in that wingspan, which is just bizarre for a kid who's 6'3 and a half, 6'4 or so. So incredibly long. And then you talk about that athleticism. We talked about wrestling, basketball, coming up as a defensive lineman, and even running literally the 1 in the 200, in track and field. He looks like it, So while he's got increased and improved power, it's really about that length and athleticism. And we saw it really at every stop with Zaire. What I loved about it is he worked left tackle, right tackle, and guard at this event. And the more we see him, right tackle and guard start to almost make more sense in terms of a projection for him. So, it's still early in his development. He's a year and change into his life as an offensive lineman. But the strides he's made, I should say, really in the last year, since last year's Rivals camp, have been immense, to the point where we probably have him underranked as a top 200 kind of guy. He's probably closer to that top 100 status, especially in the projection game, because he continues to get bigger and better every single time we see him. And he was borderline dominant, against a very good group of pass rushers.
Yeah, and we'll get into those guys too. But listen, he certainly looks taller than you said, 6'3 and a half-ish. A look taller, at least on the pictures you guys sent.
6'4 1/4 is the official.
All right, yes.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's fine. He's a long kid, and of course, I like his legs long. Fish mentioned the small ankles, which is really to me a sign of athleticism more than anything else. And bendability. Guys with smaller ankles have a tendency to bend better. So I was very impressed with that. And did Zaire indicate? I mean, obviously some of the things you guys talked about, probably both of you, with Zaire was where he is in the recruiting process. I mean, obviously we talked a little bit about him last week. He's been on campus recently and supposed to be back on campus here at FSU on Friday, based off what he told us about 4 weeks ago. But did anything new on his recruiting front, John or Fish?
I think it's all status quo. I mean, he's got a top 10 or 12 out there, which is fine. We know it's probably really about half of that. We know that the in-state programs are all jockeying. Florida's new revamped O-line group is hosting him, I think, today or tomorrow. And then, like you said, he's going back to Florida State. Miami hosted him on Saturday. Mario Cristobal does a great job with offensive line recruits. So I think those three are going to continue to jockey back and forth. FSU today, probably in the best shape among the in-state programs. I think Miami is closing some of that ground. And then you go outside of the state. He loves Penn State. He loves Oregon, was rocking Oregon gloves for those who read into that stuff, even though it usually doesn't mean anything. And then the sneaky team for him is UCLA. He really was floored by his time out there, and his intrigue level with the Bruins is really high. This is a kid who knows his trajectory is pointed up from a how coveted he is standpoint, with 40 scholarship offers. So he's a kid who's confident, willing to bet on himself, even though he knows he's early in his development and still somewhat raw as an offensive tackle. So normally you would overlook those schools, for an elite recruit like this, but I'm not. The way he talks about that top group, the top half of that top group, it does seem like there's room for multiple schools to potentially make a move up the list, but it's definitely going to start with the big three in state.
Yeah, Fish, any updates on Zaire from your side of things?
Yeah, I think Florida State's in a good spot. With Miami, like you said, you always have to worry about Mario. I think Florida State's going to be the school in state he chooses from, if it is Florida State, just from what I've heard. He's a national kid basically, so it's not surprising that some of these other schools are involved. The UCLA thing, it's crazy, but they always find their way into like one kid in Florida somehow, UCLA. So it's not surprising at all.
Well, and listen, they had a very popular hire with Sean Foster being named the head coach after Chip Kelly left, and you're going to get a bump anytime you put in a former NFL guy and guy that's young and energetic. So you're always going to see a bump with a new coach. But all right, another guy you guys really liked, another guy I liked based off the film you guys sent was Max Buchanan, who I've been saying, I think Florida State's in the lead with him, and then he goes down there and shows up, John. He's wearing a Miami shirt, and I'm sure that he had been on Miami on their campus for an unofficial visit at some point around. Right, I'm sure he was there Saturday, I would think, at Miami's campus. But I know both of you were high on him. He's a kid that I think Florida State's in a really good spot with. What did you guys see out of him on Sunday? Did it increase your belief in Max as a legitimate group of four or power four offensive line prospect?
Yeah, I'll start here. Absolutely. This was a kid who probably wasn't going to come to the camp if we didn't have him ranked the lowest in the industry. We've got him as a 5.7, high 3-star based off of 22 and 23. And he's had a darling offseason, dominant offseason with California Power, traveling around the country. And we wanted to see it. So he was motivated, felt disrespected, but he went about it the right way, showed up ready to compete very early, and he was dominant. I think he might have lost one rep, and it was probably more of a draw, and that was with Jarquez Carter. But he went up against, the very best interior guys, Davion Dixon, the Notre Dame commitment, Floyd Boucard, who's, a fast riser nationally this spring, and won almost every single rep with them. And I thought that was important because he's always been a guy with great footwork laterally. He's always been a bit of a lighter guy. I don't think he's hit the 300-pound mark just yet. So we knew he could contend with the smaller, quicker rushers. I wanted to see how he did against the big barrel-chested guys, and those two are two of the best in the country. And he more than held his own with them. I was impressed with his anchor and his upper body strength on top of what we already liked about Max's game coming into it. So it's no secret he definitely earned that 4th star with us. It's just a matter of, how high up the ranks he'll go. Can he crack that Rivals 250? But I think 6'4", 295, absolutely a guard who can come in and compete earlier, especially compared to the last few times we saw him where he was a little bit lighter, 265, 270. So he's put on some good weight and he's carrying it well as well.
Yeah, well, I kind of got a chuckle after his experience down there. He had put something on Twitter about why not just go straight to a 5-star prospect. So, he was definitely
why not?
He was definitely proud of showing out and being one of the better offensive linemen at that camp. Fish, I get your take on Buchanan. You and I kind of agree. We think that he is a heavy lean to Florida State right now. Of course, these things change, particularly in the recruiting environment we are in now, and the portal is going to play a part in that. We're getting ready to see that bust loose here in about 6 days. But what were your takeaways on Buchanan from the camp? And
I remember seeing him last year at their camp and seeing him at some other events, and I like him, but he definitely passed the test this weekend. Just very physical with his hands. You want to see guys on the O-line move other guys with their hands. They don't have to use their whole body. He basically dictated where the defensive lineman was going to go. If he put them where he wanted them to go, not where they wanted to go. I was very impressed. Very strong. He got a lot stronger since last year, more physical, his base. I still think he's a center guard. I think that there is limitations, but I think sometimes he's that guy in the draft when you see in the NFL draft, that safe pick. I think he's going to be a safe pick. I think he has very little downside to him, and that he will be a very productive, all-conference type player. That's his low end, I feel, as a prospect.
John, do you happen to know what he measured in at on Sunday?
Yeah, I just pulled up the roster here. Let me sort by name. We've got all the linemen up here. Still waiting on some of the other guys. He was 76-inch height, so 6'4", 296 actually. So
really,
I was surprised to see 296. I would have thought he was 280, 285. Like I said, he carries it well, and he came in a little bit taller than we probably would have expected. So stock is way up for Buchanan. And again, you just love a kid who's motivated, willing to compete and go out there and show it. And he absolutely did that. And in beating Addison to that MVP award, and it really came down to the last couple of reps between those two guys. Addison went against Jake Krull and Javion Hilson to solidify his status. And then, as we mentioned, Buchanan had to go against Floyd Boucard, Jarquez Carter, Davion Dixon, a bunch of blue chippers. And he had more success than Addison did there at the end. So he punched his ticket to the MVP award, and it was really close. And you'd love to see that motivation and all that sort of come together at an event like Rivals Camp.
Yeah, the reason I asked about his height, because when he was here on his last unofficial visit, he was wearing boots out at practice, which
that doesn't hurt.
That's what guys like I did when I was being recruited, because I was trying to get to 6'3". If I wore big enough boots, I might get there. And I remember going on my official visit to Sanford with a teammate of mine. We both wore boots, and we weren't quite smart enough to know that they were going to ask us to take off the boots and measure us without those. And the coach that was recruiting us, both of us just laughed at us when we showed up at the weigh and measure thing with boots on. He goes, "Boys," and then we had on 2 pair of socks. So anyway, I just wondered what he measured in at. Any other? Obviously, those are 2 guys that Florida State has high on their priority board, offensive line board for this recruiting class. Any other offensive linemen stand out to you guys that may be on Florida State's radar?
There were some 26s that absolutely looked really good. Chancellor Barclay from Lake Mineola is one who's sort of increasing his profile. Early 4-star for us in the class of 26. Still adding offers, nowhere near a verbal commitment. So he's one I'd keep an eye on from a Florida State perspective. Obviously, right down the turnpike there in Orlando. And then maybe a sleeper who certainly was head turning in his build, Gabriel Osenda, Clearwater Academy kid, 2026, but was injured last year. So 6'7", 330 pounds. You couldn't miss him out there, and he moved really well. Was kind of the sneaky number 3 or 4 OT in this group, and that is not what we would have projected going into it. So he's seemingly healthy, turning the corner. He'll trim the weight down just a little bit here going forward, and he's one who last spring, I think, when Alex Atkins visited the Clearwater Academy, picked up that Florida State offer. He just didn't get to follow it up with a full 2023 sophomore season because he was banged up, and now he's healthy. And he was maybe the surprise of the offensive line group. Gabriel Osenda, definitely a name to know who's going to travel up the ranks in that 26th class.
Well, it is duly noted, and somebody I'll be reaching out to shortly. There's no doubt about that. All right, so let's flip over to the defensive line since it's a natural transition, and you guys have mentioned a couple of guys, including Jarquez Carter, Floyd Bucard, and then, of course, Jake Krull. Looked like he had a good day out there, and apparently he's got an unofficial visit to Florida State on the 27th. I'm still confused about the information I got. It wasn't real clear, but he is going to show up on Florida State's campus at some point. And then, of course, probably the guy that looked like he might have had the best day of anybody at the camp at any position, Javion Hilson. So, I think he was MVP of the defensive line group. So let's start with Javion. Obviously, a Florida State commit. A lot of smoke around Alabama, and but I do think Florida State. He's been up here several times. Got an official visit scheduled. Was decked out in mostly Florida State gear. But let's talk a little bit about him as a football player first. What did you guys see out of him on Sunday that impressed you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how John feels about him, but he, like I said in my post, he reminds me of Dallas Turner, who's going to Alabama. Went to Alabama, ended up a first-round pick. Very similar coming out of high school. You can see Dallas was like 230, 225, 230, and then all of a sudden you look at him now, he's 265, 270. I think Hilson has that same build to become a very big kid in college. Very explosive. He lined up real wide, so he wanted to utilize his speed and his athleticism off the edge. He does need a little work technique-wise, but the quickness off the edge, he was by far the fastest kid off the ball. Very explosive. He's going to do very well. We saw him in the state title game, and that's what, even when he didn't get sacks, the constant pressure that he got in that game made the rest of the D-line's job very easy.
Yeah, he's freaky. I mean, there's no other way to put it. The number one weak side edge rusher for us at Rivals coming into the event, and definitely cemented that status. Like we said, this was a better, bigger, and deeper offensive line group than we anticipated. Down here, just you don't expect offensive linemen and quarterbacks to be superior in South Florida, but we had some kids travel, and we had some kids, maybe overperform. But even against that kind of group, against Zaire Addison, against great offensive tackles, I mean, Hilson was rarely challenged on this day. Like Fish said, he lined up in that 2012 Philadelphia Eagles wide 9 and screamed off the edge, even though offensive tackles knew that was his plan. But he also showed some counter stuff, which was really encouraging just from an evaluation standpoint. He showed a little bit more extension and power in his upper body than maybe I anticipated, because he's just 6'4", 230, so long and cut that you just expect him to scream off the edge. So any of the counter game, especially successfully, was really going to solidify his standing, and he showed sort of the full package there. Even though we know extremely thin, still lanky, going to add a lot of weight. And I like that Dallas Turner comp, Fish. I absolutely can see a similar trajectory over the next few years, and that's what we've sort of come to expect with these special rushers in this state.
All right, let's move on to Jarquez Carter, another kid Florida State's high on, a kid that's high on Florida State, but I think he's still got a top 12. I don't think he's narrowed it down any further than that. But he's been at Florida State's campus multiple times. A shorter guy, 6'2"ish. How did he perform, and how do you guys see his stock coming out of this camp? And anything on Florida State's side of things? Fish, you want to start?
All right, no problem. Yeah, I mean, I like him. I don't think he has the upside of some of the other defensive tackles on the board, but I do think he could be a very solid guy to come in, play in the 2 or 3 deep right away, and provide some depth. He's a guy that I definitely think needs a year or two in a college program and develop. And I know that's tough these days with NIL, but I don't think he's a guy that's going to come in right away and make an impact. He's a little undersized. I think he has a good work ethic. He works hard. I think he does have some physical limitations, but overall, I think he's a very good player, someone you take because you never have enough D linemen. He's a guy that I think is down the road is what you're going to project him as a starter down the road, maybe 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road.
Yeah, I'm right with Fish on this one. If it's about the long-term projection, his frame is only going to allow him to add so much because he's 6'2" and change, as you guys said. But that being said, 275 or so, he still lives in that sort of tweener world that really helps him in this type of setting. He can overpower those unbalanced blockers, those guys that are still developing, especially in the lower half. But he's also got enough quickness to get behind the big old interior guys, the 300-pounders, 320-pounders. He's still too quick for that group. And I think if you're going to be a tweener and you're going to live in that world, you got to have that balance, but you also got to have some technique. And I thought his hands were really impressive on this day. Some of his wins were those dramatic, sort of viral highlight wins where, the hands are chopped down so quickly and he's already replaced the blocker en route to the passer. So when he won big like that, you could understand why. But at the same time, his lack of length is going to hurt him when those longer guys do get to latch onto him and that initial move doesn't work. So I think higher floor, lower ceiling type of player, but again, carries his weight kind of like Buchanan really well, closer to 280, but he looks like he's 255, 260 out there. So I thought that was encouraging and probably helps him, see the field a little bit sooner at one of these programs. And I do think it's probably a big three battle. I think right now, look, he's a Newberry kid, so Florida's always going to be in that mix. But he's taking his time. And I think, a lot of these recruits are waiting to see what Florida does on the field, how that looks going into, the colder months. We all know what that means. So in the meantime, I think Florida State and Miami are taking advantage of that. There's a little bit more stability and feel with those two programs, and he's going to continue to visit them, and they're already among the schools he's seen the most. So I do see this as a big three battle in the end, though Colorado, Penn State, a couple others are doing a good job. I do see him staying in the state in the end.
Well, another guy that I know has kind of exploded on the scene. He's moved around a little bit, was in Mobile last year, is now down at Miami Central. That's Floyd Boucard. I know he impressed you, right, Fish, at the UA Under Armour camp earlier this spring. And, he's a guy that's apparently was offered by Florida State, I guess, about a month and a half ago, probably a little bit shorter than that. But obviously Miami and Louisville are all involved in his recruiting process. And I think he's a guy that will probably only continue to get – his profiles only continue to grow. You're going to see schools outside the state of Florida continue to come in and offer this kid this spring, I would think. But just y'all's takeaway on Boucard. And, John, I'll start with you because I know Fish has seen him a couple times.
Yeah, another one kind of in that Jarquez Carter mold, but he's got a little bit more upside in his frame. He's probably an inch taller, just under 6'4", 285 right now. Looks great on the hoof. A guy who we think could probably easily carry 300 pounds and work as a little bit more of a power player, and that's really his calling card. He does have quickness, a little bit raw in his technique, but on this Sunday, he really was more reliant on the leverage and power game, whereas Under Armour, we saw a lot more of his swiftness, his quickness. He was a little bit more in power mode on Sunday, and going up against a Max Buchanan, what was a little different for him compared to some of the other guys at Under Armour. So he didn't have as much success, but you could also still see those raw tools on display. And now, look, he's at Miami Central, where they have just churned out defensive linemen. So you expect him to sharpen up on that technique here going forward, with his first spring with the Rockets and obviously, into the 2024 season. So he's one whose stock is way up anyway, but it's not going to slow down because we do think he'll be one that gets better even before he gets to college.
Fish?
Yeah, John talked about him physically. His lower body looks like, honestly, like a tree trunk. He's got huge backside, huge legs. What you want a D tackle to look like, I think he's going to push well above 300. I think he'll get to 320, 330. And the one thing is, I've seen Auburn come down to Florida and land so many of these type of guys. The guys that maybe aren't the high 4, high 5-star guys, but they end up like 3-year starters. He's very powerful. He's very strong. He did not abuse guys this weekend like he did Under Armour, and that's because the level of competition went up. The old linemen, Buchanan and Addison, were at just a different level of anybody that we saw at Under Armour. But he never really he didn't get dominated by any of them. If it was more of a stalemate, but he just is so powerful. And I like his mentality. He just wants to rep out, and he gets back up in the front of the line. I just think guys like this that you could tell he loves football, and you talk to him, he wanted to come down to Florida and test his skills against other Florida athletes. And I think he's only going to get better. I think his upside's tremendous. I think his best days are still way ahead of him. So.
Yeah, and listen, he's like I said, he's been in 3 different programs now in 3 years, so he's only going to get better when he gets, consistency in coaching and what he's doing. And of course, obviously, he's a kid that's still growing into his body too. But a guy that was supposed to be up here last week and did not make it, so hopefully we'll get to see Floyd on an unofficial visit sometime between now and the end of spring ball. A couple of kids that were offered by Florida State after their unofficial visits about a week and a half ago, Mandrell Desir and Daryl Desir. And listen, they're pretty looking things, boys. And when they show up on campus, they certainly looked the part. How did they play on Sunday?
Yeah, they're in the Buchanan camp for me. They've always looked the part. I will say that, but I think we've been undervaluing them just a little bit. Look, they were on a loaded Norland team last year. Fish, they went 6, 7, 8 deep on the D line, and all of them are Power 4 guys, like every single one of them. So we didn't get sort of the full sample of the Desir twins. The Lumen twins, who are both at Rutgers now, were the edge guys, the primary edge guys for them, and they had some Friday night types on the interior. But that being said, Mandrell Desir worked on the inside a little bit last year, and Daryl was more of that classic edge, even though they're built similarly, obviously, as twins. And Mandrell, I think, caught more attention on Sunday. I was a little bit more impressed with his game, and that experience inside, I think, starts to show. 6'4", 6'5", 255 pounds, like you said, Pat. Just exactly how you draw them up. You can throw weight on them and let them be more active interior types, or allow them to be 5 or 7 techniques that overpower tackles on the edge. And Mandrell's intensity and versatility really stood out. I think he's going to be in the 4-star conversation here going forward, and is going to have a banner year at Norland now that he's going to take every single rep out there. But both of those guys looked really good, and that's another battle that probably ends up hard to get out of the state of Florida.
Fish, what are your thoughts on the Twins?
My question to John is, how did Norland didn't win a state title? I mean, these guys, when you watch them do the drills, Pat, when they have them get on their stomach and jump up and go through the pads, these two are very light on their feet and explosive. Maybe it hasn't shown up yet on film for both of them, the consistency, but the athleticism and what they can do is freakish at times. One's a little better than the other, but I think both of them have a lot of the traits you want in defensive linemen, whether they play inside or outside in college. I think they could get a lot bigger. I mean, you look at them, they haven't even come close. These are guys that are going to be 290 and not look any bigger than 260 because of their physiques. They're really impressive physically. I think both of them have a chance to be really good football players. But these are two guys that you're going to have to wait on. They're your typical South Florida kids. Well, people go, well, why do people come down here? These are like the type of kids that the one Jason Paul Pierre types that they aren't good until their second or third year of college. And then everybody's like, where did these kids come from? How did they end up so darn good? That's what they are, these two type of kids.
Yeah, JPP was I still remember him at the Toronto Bowl doing 13 back-to-back backflips at 6'5", 200.
They're not quite there yet.
Listen, JPP did not play his senior year till like the last 4 games of his senior year. They went to the state finals, Deerfield Beach, and he had like 4 sacks in the state title game. And the following year in the spring, I saw him playing tight end. And here's this 6'5" guy running seam routes and just running by linebackers and DBs. And coaches are like, well, I don't think he's going to get big enough. I'm like, this kid has never had more than like a peanut butter sandwich once a day. Like, they didn't realize the situation he came in, these coaches. And then he went off to junior college, and that's all she wrote. I mean, he ended up a first rounder and potentially one of the top defensive ends in pro football for a while. So
yeah, I got a funny story on JPP. So obviously we got him at USF when I was there, and I believe he was only with us for 6 months, 2009 season, which I was still a young man at that time. And I remember we hadn't quite got him cleared for practice. We got him to Tampa. We had to get him through the clearinghouse. And so we had him in Tampa, but not on campus. And Jim Levitt calls me one morning. He goes, I need you to go pick up JPP and take him to a local park, and y'all run gassers together. And I'm like, listen, I'm 39, but I'm not going to be able to hang with JPP. I said, I don't know if you've met him yet, Jim, which he had. Yeah, but anyway, it was kind of funny JPP story. So I took him to the park, and he whipped my ass on gassers all day long. That was not a fun day for me. But all right, so one other guy on the defensive front, then we'll move off of that, unless you guys just got somebody that you feel like we need to talk about. But got mixed reviews on this guy. Nick could not stop talking about him. Fish, you were a little bit underwhelmed with him, but he's a guy that has a big profile from a recruiting standpoint, and that is Jake Krull from Orlando Bishop Moore. Fish, I'll start with you to kind of end the debate between the Osceola guys.
Listen, I thought he did well. My whole thing is like, with Jake, you're thinking, all right, is this guy the next Joey or Nick Bosa? That's the projection that what he was. But I'm just saying, like, that's what you expected when I heard when he was an 8th, 9th grader and he started going to these camps. Physically, I want to see where he goes because I know his dad's got more height than he is. He's kind of a tweener. He's like, I don't know how big he's going to get. And his body is not ripped. He's not a ripped kid. He's not somebody that looks like he spent a lot of time in the weight room. So maybe Bishop Moore just doesn't have a great weight program, which is always possible. It's high school. What is he going to look like in college? You like what he sees, but how much upside does he have at his size? I think he's about, I don't know what they got him in. He looked around like 6'2", maybe 6'2 and a half, 225 pounds. Is he an end? Is he an outside? Is he a stand-up guy? Is he a linebacker? I don't know where he really plays. So that was my only thing. He performed really well, but this is a camp. I've seen guys dominate camps and not do very well. And then guys that are terrible at camps end up in the first round of the draft. So I want to see how he develops over the next year, really, to see where he projects out at.
Yeah, look, easy to like Jake Krull a lot after seeing him in this kind of setting. And he did the same thing at Under Armour. Look, he was the only guy to beat Solomon Thomas at Under Armour. So he builds buzz in these type of events. Look, he's like you said, Fish. You were really close, by the way, 6'2 and a quarter, 221. So he's right there on where you said. And what's interesting about him is that, like you said, he's not the most chiseled kid, but he does have some length to him. I will give him that. You could tell he's going to grow and get taller, but how much weight is he going to carry? But mainly, can he maintain this swiftness that he plays with? He's got great bend and a great plan when he rushes these guys. He beat Zaire Addison with a spin move that was lower than Zaire could get to. But, is that a camp setting deal, or is that something that he could do on Saturdays? He does it on Fridays, 17 sacks last year at Bishop Moore, but can he do that on Saturdays against, a first-round type of offensive tackle? So that combined with the frame and where it goes is really where the question marks are. But I think for, being a sophomore and finishing your sophomore year, I think he's in a good position should he continue to put on weight, because he did measure in really long, 79-inch wingspan. So he's got great length to him, just a matter of how much he does fill out, and then how does that affect his calling cards, which are really, bend and quickness right now. Can you maintain that if you get to 265, 270 in 2 or 3 years?
Right. Well, I know we're spending a lot of time on the guys up front, so we'll kind of change gears a little bit, go to some skill position guys. And, I'm shocked every time I watch his film, and particularly as I watch him play through the playoffs and now watch his offer list continue to explode. Florida State, as of Sunday, had not offered quarterback Brady Hart. I cannot fathom why they haven't. Can you guys see anything in these camps that would stop Florida State from it. I mean, as we all know, most of these offers are not committable on the spot. So why wouldn't you put yourself in the game for a 2026 quarterback like Brady Hart?
Do you want me to go first, John? I'll take this. I think he reminds me a lot of John Brantley coming out, and I think it may be more of a system fit. The talent's there. I think he's more of a pocket passer. Maybe he's more of an air raid type quarterback that's going to stand in the pocket and throw it away, throw it around. I don't know what type of really is he a great athlete. I'm not sure. I've watched him last year in the state finals and then watched him on film, and I don't see that great dual threat, but it may be more of a system. You know how it is. There's guys we see all the time, and I'm like, hey, why isn't this school offered?
Right.
And it just happens to be square peg, round hole type situation where maybe he's not a fit. I mean, you look at what Norvell looks at. He really looks at that dual threat, that ability to run also in that equation. And if the kid can't do that at a high level, maybe that's part of the reason why they haven't offered, Brady Hart.
John, what are your thoughts on Brady as a potential quarterback?
Yeah, look, a big fan of his game. Like Fish said, really lit it up last year as a first-year starter at Cocoa in that state title run that they had. But he's a gunslinger. He's not a read option kind of guy. He is a decent enough athlete to perform well off platform and on the move, but you're not going to design runs for Brady Hart. So I do think that could be part of the evaluation process for the Noles. And he's still raw. First-year starter last year. We were kind of talking to him a little bit in one-on-ones. He kind of threw off his back foot and relied on that arm talent a little bit and threw some interceptions because of it. So I do think there's still, while there is an encouraging body of work that he's put together, I think there's still a long way to go. But luckily for him, look, just a sophomore, going to have 2 more years with this thing. But he's a gunslinger, threw double-digit picks last year, even though Coco had great receivers all around him. So he's willing to take those chances and push the ball down the field. So I do think that's more of his lane as a quarterback, as opposed to a guy who's going to be incredibly efficient and run the football on occasion.
All right. Obviously, Florida State's got a quarterback committed for 2025, Tramel Jones, who is actually on the Florida campus today for unofficial visit. And I'm going to ask you guys some things about that, because that seems to be possibly a instant reaction to Antoine Hill being on Florida State's campus on Saturday. But any other quarterbacks 2025 or 2026 that Florida State fans and Osceola subscribers and listeners should pay attention to based on what you guys saw at the Rivals camp?
John?
Yeah, it was a good group. Definitely deeper than most camps in the state of Florida at that position. 25 is probably locked up. I think Tramel is really solid to Florida State. Florida has been pushing him for about a year to try to get in the game for a potential flip. But they're also in the game for Antoine Hill. They're also in the game for Ryan Montgomery. So I think this is a board and depth deal for the Gators and due diligence from Tramel's perspective. But yeah, at the camp, some 26 guys, Brady Hart, obviously we just talked about. If there is a dual threat to watch from a developmental standpoint for a fit at Florida State, I'd like Darian Coleman. He's a little small right now, 5'11", 6 foot out of Jones High School in Orlando, but he took the job from Trevor Jackson, who is at Florida State right now, and really became the guy. The ball just jumps off of his hands. He's a long quarterback. You can see that he's going to be a 6 foot plus guy in the coming years, but just real thin right now. But a true dual threat, explosive athlete. I think at Under Armour Orlando, he had the second highest vertical leap. He's a 4.6 laser guy with true arm talent. So I do think a lot of eyes will be on him this year because he won't be splitting reps with Jackson. So he's going to be the guy for Jones. I mean, he's got Vernell Brown to throw to. They're probably going to get some transfers on top of that. So he should have a dominant year, kind of like Brady Hart just put together at Cocoa, but he offers more of that true dual threat combination within his game. For me, it's just a matter of the frame. Right now, again, 5'11", 6 foot, probably 170 on a good day. That's going to be the concern point for a Florida State type program. But he's got Oklahoma, he's got UCF, he's got a lot of offers to his name, and he wants to come off the board early. So that'll be interesting to see post commitment what a school like Florida State does with a kid like that in state.
Yeah, interesting. I've watched Trevor a little bit in spring practice, and that's a guy that can really throw the football. So it says a lot about Darian that was able to come in there and push Trevor for playing time, that ultimately unseat him at the end of the day as a sophomore. So be interesting to continue to watch his development. You mentioned Trey Brown. Actually, was texting with Trey a little bit today. He is down on Florida's campus, and he said really status quo on recruiting process since the last time we talked. Not a whole lot to update other than the fact that he had a good time at Miami. And I think when you go on an unofficial or official visit at Miami, just like Florida State, you're going to have fun, right? I mean, that's what those things are geared for these days, probably more so and then they are educational with how recruiting is going now. But obviously, he was at the camp. I saw him make I still have to go back and watch it again to see if he actually got the ball before it hit the ground, but they were working a little comeback route on the sideline.
Oh, the one-handed?
Yeah. Was that
It looked good to me.
Yeah. So just y'all's thoughts on Trey from what you saw, and really at this point, just talk about the top skill guys that you saw, whether it be running back, wide receiver, tight end on offense. Because I know we've only got about 14 more minutes with you, John, so I don't want to.
Yeah, I've got just a couple minutes left, so
okay.
I'm gonna jump in. The one kid I continue to get really impressed with is Derek Cooper, the running back at Chaminade.
Freak show.
He's a freak show. I mean, I don't know if I'm gonna put him in the Dalvin and Sony level yet, but physically and athletically, I don't think there's too many running backs that have his talent, just his ability to. He glides when he's running. I was standing next to Tavani Mizell and his dad, and they watched the kid, and he goes, "Wow!" Like he basically was like, "Man, that kid's really good." He stands out when he performs because of how easy and he moves and he glides for a big kid. I think he has 5-star talent. That's just my opinion. I don't know how you feel about him, John, but he's a kid I really like. So.
Yeah, we got him in the top 100 in the new 26 rankings, and after Sunday, I'm like, kind of undersold him. I mean that says a lot for a kid who did not play a ton last year in a loaded backfield there at Cardinal Gibbons. So just fascinated with him. 6'1", right under 200 pounds, chiseled. It just looks like he can do anything. I think he could legitimately be a bigger running back who provides true 3-down value. I mean, look, he won MVP over a lot of running backs that have much more experience and clout at that position. And none of his offers are at running back, so that's how great of an athlete Cooper is. Georgia offered him as a safety. I think Penn State just offered him as an athlete. He's got Miami. He's going to have every offer when all is said and done. It's just really more of a question of not is he in 5-star range. I think that conversation as we move forward will be easier to have than where the hell is he going to line up. I mean, he could legitimately be a running back, a safety. He's working wide receiver reps at Chaminade, talking to the coaches yesterday.
I mean, he's got great hands, and he's impossible to cover. Like, there's not a linebacker out there. Or, no, I'm telling you, like, forget putting a linebacker on him. You may as well just blow. You're going to hear the band sound because he will outrun any linebacker. There's no linebacker that could stay with him in coverage. Just
he could be like a Harold Perkins kind of guy where it don't even matter where you put him. He can rush the passer. He can cover. He can certainly tote the rock. And he can catch. So depending on how he does develop, because he is, again, 6'1", 200 right now, I think that will be interesting. But, yeah, we can be approaching like a Derrick Henry conversation just from a size and position standpoint in 2 years. Like, who's going to let this kid run the ball if that becomes his preference? And otherwise, there's going to be a linebacker safety hybrid debate going on with them, or maybe even a H-back type of debate. I mean, he could be Brock Bowers in 2 years. We don't know, but that's how intriguing Cooper is. And he really became the talk of the camp after the linemen were done.
Yeah, and I know y'all like Javion Mallory. Just your thoughts on him, Fish. I know you comp him to Alex at Collins. He was a South Florida kid, and
good comp.
Yeah, Javion's got like an old man's body. Like he looks like he looks like a grown man. Like he's been around. Like you see this young kid's face, and like he doesn't like Derek's built more like a track athlete. Looks long, lean, muscles. Like Javion looks like an old school running back. And what impressed me about Javion is last year they went against Atlantic, and anytime you take a school like a West Boca that hasn't had a lot of success, he was the best player on the field and dominated a game, and they were the reason he won. And that always impresses me when you take a kid like a Mallory who plays at a program that hasn't had a ton of success. He's just very productive. He's that guy that's going to pick up 4 or 5 yards, and then all of a sudden, later in the game, he busts off a 60-yard run because he wears the defense out. Not as fluid as Derek, but he's probably more instinctual of a runner right now and further ahead. But Cooper has more upside. But Javion's a kid that I could see go anywhere and have a very good career. Like I said, he reminds me a lot of Alex Collins coming out. I think this kid has a chance to be a very good running back in college.
I do want to ask y'all about a defensive back, mainly because I was texting with him earlier today, and he was at the camp and was offered by Clemson on an unofficial visit there on Friday, and that's Greg Zay Thomas. Now, Fish, you and I have talked about this kid several times. He's a fixture on Florida State's campus. Now he's got an official visit set up with Clemson for May 31st, and then he's going to be at FSU on June 21st. But really, he's a kid I'm surprised that really has not committed to Florida State already. I don't know whether that's maybe he's still doing his due diligence or Florida State is, but, the number of visits, it's kind of like Zaire Addison. Zaire's going to have been on campus almost 10 times in less than 2 years by the time he gets here on Friday. Greg Thomas has been up here a ton. What did y'all see from him? What do you like about him? Because, listen, he's a guy that, again, Clemson just offered. He's had a Florida State offer for a while. Seems to be still garnering more and more attention from some Power 4 programs as he gets ready to go into his senior year.
Yeah, one thing, he was wearing Clemson jacket or pullover jacket when we first pulled up. He was wearing that, so maybe the gear doesn't
miss
matter.
That orange.
Yeah. I mean, it was bright orange. I mean, physically, he's probably one of the more impressive looking defensive backs. I mean, he really stands out. He's tall. He's not 6 foot, 6'1", and listed at 6'2". He's legitimately 6'2" and maybe 6'3". I think he's more of a safety than a corner at the next level. Not super fluid, but he's not going to hurt you in coverage. I think he's best with the ball, playing downhill. He tackles well. I think he's one of those guys that did well at the camp. I like him a lot, but more of a safety than a corner. I know why Florida State likes him. Randy likes big, long, athletic corners. Maybe he could be like a Mike Rump who played for Randy at University of Miami, that type of player. So it'll be interesting. I think Greg's leaning Florida State, but, you never know. The longer they take when they're a big lean to one school, that's always a concern for me, that why aren't they pulling the trigger? Is it a coach's decision or the kid?
Yeah, that's why I was asking. All right, what were your thoughts on Greg, John?
Yeah, look, he's big and pretty, track athlete, American heritage. You understand why he's blown up since the fall when he moved into that starting role. Got a pick against Jeremiah Smith last year at the game I was at. But yeah, Florida State's the dream school. I put in a future cast, I think in September of last year for Florida State. As soon as they offered, we know about the Sertan connection on top of that with American heritage as well. Earl Little, a bunch of guys, Marvin as well, that make that connection make more sense. But look, I do think there's some due diligence. He knew other offers were going to come in, and I think he just wanted to see how big it was going to get. LSU came through, Miami came through, now Clemson is on the board. I think this will be a Florida State, Miami, Clemson conversation, probably in that order, but Clemson has the most room to make up ground on Florida State. So I could see it being a true, ACC power conversation there in the end. But I do think he still wants to come off the board this offseason. So I do, until that changes, I do think Florida State is the program to beat in this race. But no doubt Clemson's closing ground. And like Fish said, you understand the corner conversation with him. In this day and age, being a big boundary guy at 6'2" with great linear speed and ball skills. But look, in our day, corners were smaller, quicker, with smooth hips. And those are some elements that he struggles with. He lost his first rep in one-on-ones on a simple curl route. But everything down the field, he knocked away and had a great performance thereafter. So I think that's who he is, zone boundary type corner, but the safer bet is probably safety in the end.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to wrap it up. I know you've got an appointment here shortly, and we did not plan to go an hour. I told you we'd go 30 minutes, but you and Fish obviously had a lot of information to share. And, I think our recruiting boards will probably stay pretty where they are for about the next 6 days, and then the portal is going to make us reshift everything.
Yeah.
So, but John, we appreciate you taking the time as always to join us, and you joined us twice in the last 5 days, so we certainly appreciate that. Listen, if you don't subscribe to the Osceola YouTube channel, but you are watching this show, please hit the subscribe button, sign up for notifications so that you can get alerts to when we have live and tape shows on the Osceola YouTube channel. If you're not a subscriber to the Osceola, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com and check us out. We've got some recruiting info in front of the paywall, a lot of it behind the paywall, but certainly hope you will check us out where we have all of John's and Fish's thoughts from the Rivals camp in writing on our message boards and in written articles. And then Nick Carlisle, who helps us out with recruiting at the Osceola, is going to have some articles coming out as he returns to Tallahassee today. But we appreciate Aer Lingus for sponsoring this show. Aer Lingus is working with Florida State Athletics to plan these trips, to plan the trip to Ireland, Dublin, Ireland for the Georgia Tech game. You can go to Seminoles2Ireland.com, Seminoles, the number 2, Ireland.com, and you'll see the travel and ticket packages there. John, thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next week or possibly later in the week with another Reeling Them In, depending on what happens with these unofficial visits and commitments and those kind of things that are going on all over the country these days. But, John, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys again next week.
Thank you.